Okay, let me just recollect that the Cauchy-Schwarz and I don't know how they found that. And then we have this Holder's inequality. And then we have this Minkowski's inequality. These three important inequalities we prove for vectors in n dimension. Okay? So let me just recollect it and keep it in one place. So suppose I had vectors x1, x2, xn, n components belonging to Cn and y1, y2, yn. So I suppose I had two n component vectors where the components can be complex numbers, and then we defined the inner product to be summation I equal to 1 to n xi yi bar, and the length of x squared, the two length of x squared to be x comma x, and the p length of x to be summation I equal to 1 to n mod xi to the power of p to the power of 1 over p to the power of 1 less than p. With these notations, the Cauchy-Schwarz inequality set simply this. This is just our ordinary thing. The dot product is less than equal to product. And the Holder's inequality set, we still write it in this notation, less than or equal to. And the Minkowski's inequality said that, so writing it in these terms, this is what the Minkowski's inequality says. So you can interpret all those things in this notation. Right. There are many times this will come in handy. I keep repeatedly referring to them. Now the first thing that I want to do is, if you look at the real numbers system, we have already discussed this in the previous set of lectures, but still I will just recollect. The main ingredient that gives the start off for all the analysis is the notion of the absolute value of the real number. So we have, for every r, the absolute value defined as absolute r is equal to r if r is positive, 0 if r is 0, minus r if r is less than 0. Okay, so this is the one of the most simple but important first steps in analysis. Okay. And what it does is, with each real number, it associates another real number, but now which is non-negative. See, mod r is always positive. When r is positive, it is positive. When r is negative, it's negative of that, so it's positive. It's 0 only when r equal to 0. So the first thing that we observe is that the absolute value of r is greater than or equal to 0 for every r in R, and equal to 0 if and only if r equal to 0. The second and third important properties are the following. Basically, there are two arithmetic operations with real numbers. One is addition, the other one is multiplication. What does this absolute value do to these two operations? To the first operation is what we get the so-called triangle inequality for absolute values. The absolute value of r plus s is less than or equal to this for every r less than. So that's what it does to the addition operation. There is also this multiplication operation in the real numbers, and what does it do to the multiplication? The absolute value of r s, the absolute value of r s for every r s. These three are very important properties of the absolute value, which we will immediately now generalize. Okay. I'll simultaneously do some of the generalizations. Now we replace the set of real numbers R by a vector space V. Okay, and we will first concentrate on this vector space of n vectors, or n component vectors. So let Cn denote n component complex vector space. What does that mean? I take all the n component vectors, addition is component wise, and you can multiply every vector by a scalar, and the scalar can be complex, and that's again multiplication by component wise. So what it says is x plus y is x1 plus y1, etc. xn plus yn, with x and y as it is here, and for every xy. Then if alpha is any real number, any complex number, we multiply a vector by component wise multiplication. With these two operations, it becomes a vector space. That means superpositions are allowed. There is zero vector, every vector has a negative vector. Whatever we normally do is all allowed. Okay? And the multiplication and this addition, distribute, etc., etc. The standard laws, everything that is we like to do are allowed. That's what it really means. Now, the real number is one of the first vector spaces. Okay, the real numbers form a vector space. That is one component, real component vector. That's all. What we have done here is, with each one such vector, we associated a number. We will now do that here. We associate with each number, with each x in Cn, a non-negative real number, which we denote by two lines instead of one line. For real line we had one line. Just for convention we follow this, because we have to distinguish between the absolute value and the general, such that all these properties hold. Whatever was there, first of all the association must be with each vector we associate a number which is non-negative and equal to 0 if and only if x equal to 0. Now instead of x equal to Cn, you can start with Rn and take the real scalar. So you can take the real vector space also. In general, you have to count that vector space. Secondly, in a vector space there are two operations. One is vector addition, the other one is multiplication of a vector by a scalar. Now just like we asked what absolute value did to the two basic arithmetic operations, we asked what does this so-called association do for the basic vector operation. So we ask the same properties, less than or equal to for every xy in R, and 3. Now, how does this look like? The next operation involves a scalar and a vector. So, if you take a vector and multiply it by a scalar, you get another vector. Now, if you look at that association, it should come out as this. That is, you want to put modulus. Modulus makes sense for alpha. This new association makes sense for the vector max. If we can associate with each other, then this is called a norm on the vector space. Now, there is nothing, nowhere Cn plays a role in this definition. I could have taken any vector space and done this. So basically, therefore, Cn was only to start, to give examples, immediate examples using these fellows. Okay. We will come to later examples. Okay. We could do the same thing. Similar thing for any real or any complex vector space. With each vector you associate a number. Then this is called a norm, or the length of the vector. And norm x. If we write like this, we call it norm x or length of x. Now, the immediate examples are the following. On Cn, norm x defined as, with various examples we'll take, the usual x comma x, which we had there. This is called the 2 norm, square root, and the p norm, which is defined as what? These are all norms on that complex vector space. Now, what are the things to be verified? First, we have to make sure that it is non-negative. First, let us look at this. This is certainly non-negative because x comma x is non-negative. When is it 0? When x comma x is 0. But we know that x comma x is 0 if and only if x is 0 or norm x is 0. And then, if we put a plus y, x plus y 2, that Minkowski's inequality with p equal to 2. Norm x plus y 2 is less than or equal to norm x 2 plus norm y 2. And modulus just comes out of this entire operation. If I multiply each component by alpha, in any one of these definitions, that mod alpha comes out. That is what that says. So this is all easy to verify. Similarly, for general P, it is only the triangle inequality which is non-trivial, and that is given by the Minkowski. That is why that Minkowski's inequality is important. In all these cases, it is the triangle inequality that will be difficult to prove. So some inequality will have to come into the picture, and in all these cases, it is the Minkowski's inequality that helps us to prove the triangle inequality. We then say Cn with this norm is a normed vector space or a normed linear space. We can also take any vector space. Instead of Cn, put a norm on it and think of it as a normed linear space. We will see more examples as we go along. Yes?
Is it the same as inner product space?
No. It is not the same as inner product space. We will come to that later, because for example this one, a norm need not come from an inner product. This is the only norm which comes from an inner product. These norms don't come from inner product. Okay. Inner product space, every inner product space is a norm linear space. Every inner product induces a norm. But every norm need not be induced by an inner product. That's another thing we should come back to. First we'll look at only the notion of length. We have not brought in the inner product at all. It so happens that one particular norm has come through an inner product. Other norms have nothing to do with inner product. Okay, where was that? You should now look at, therefore, if you take this norm, this is a non-linear space, but you can take the same vector space, but take this norm some other p, that is also a non-linear space. The underlying vector space is the same, but the norms are different. So as vector spaces they are same, the carrier vector space is the same, but as non-linear spaces they are different because the structure could be different because of the norm being different. Well, it so turns out that when you are dealing with finite dimensional, there is not such a great structural difference topologically. In fact, they are all equivalent. That you will see as I go along and mention. But right now, on face value, we can only say these two are two different nonlinear spaces. The carrier space is the same, but the norm is different. So the notion of length is different in the two different spaces. Whereas the vectors are all the same, addition is the same, scalar multiplication is the same. The only thing different is the length. So as a package, as a nonlinear space, these are all different nonlinear spaces. Okay. So this is simply an immediate generalization of the fact of R equipped with the absolute value. You can have a vector space equipped with a norm. That's the straightforward generalization. For example, since I discussed this last time, I could even mention here as example 2. On Cn, we could also define where A is the positive definite Hermitian matrix. This is another norm. Okay, this is another new norm. The moment you take, if you take A to be identity matrix, you get this norm. If you take A to be identity matrix, you get this norm. But if you take a general positive definite metric, you get a newer norm. And the triangle inequality is what we proved last time for general Hermitian forms. We proved it last time. So that's exactly what the Schwarz inequality, which gives us the. Did I prove the triangle inequality? No. Okay. Exercise proved triangle inequality. Okay. It follows from the Cauchy-Schwarz. We can manipulate the Cauchy-Schwarz and get it. Anyway, we can verify, we'll come back and verify many of these things. What I want to point out here is, when you want to do analysis on a finite dimensional space, it's imperative that you know the algebra of that space well. So the linear algebra part of the Cn must be thorough. Then a lot of these matrices will start coming into the picture in our analysis. So at least complex Hermitian matrices, at least that much must be extremely clear what is happening with complex Hermitian matrices when we deal with finite dimensional spaces. Okay. Right, at least let me stop. Let me give another example. Let's take now, instead of all these Cn, I now say I can take any vector space and do the same thing. So let us take, what is the notation used? I don't know. Okay. This is the notation used. Cn cross n, which means complex n by n matrices. So this is the vector space of all complex n by n matrices for a fixed n. So how do you add two such matrices? Entry wise. How do you multiply a matrix by a number? Entry wise. So finished. So that's the same thing as here. Here it was component wise, it is entry wise. It is cheating actually. It is again an n squared component vector. I am only writing it as in a very peculiar way and cheating, I am doing something different. It's only an n squared component. Keeping that in mind, I can for example now define for any A belonging to C n cross n, we can define well, after all, if I can treat it as an n squared component vector, I can apply all those norms here also. I can for example take mod Aij to the power of p to the power of 1 over p. That's a norm. Because you treat that matrix as a n squared component vector and you are done. The same arguments will follow. So for 1 less than or equal to p less than infinity is a norm. Or Cn cross n. So therefore we have Cn cross n is a non-linear space. That's not a great example by any stretch of imagination, because it is just writing the n squared components in a peculiar manner and then cheating by saying I'm dealing with matrices. But important thing is that there are other norms which are of great importance in matrices. These are all the straightforward norms. Well, I'll just passingly mention, okay, I'll not completely discuss this until perhaps much later in the course if it still survives. If I survive, you survive, or it survives. The subject survives. Take any A, n by n matrix, complex, okay. Now what does it do? Look at it in a different way. No longer look at it as an n squared component vector. Look at it now geometrically. Look at that matrix geometrically. What we can do is, if you take the n component space, this matrix A converts every vector here into a new vector there. If you take an n component vector and multiply it by this matrix, again I get an n component vector. So you think of this n component matrix as a transformation now. Okay. So what it does is, it takes this n space and kind of distorts that space. There is some elasticity going on. So each vector is displaced. Now what you do is, it's some kind of a linearity there. What you do is, you try to quantify this elasticity. Now there are many things that you do in elasticity. What is it? Strain, stress and things like that. One of the simplest thing is, what happens to the length? Change in length by original length. If the original length is unit, how much change will, that is the rate of change of length or whatever you want to call it. So you take a vector and look at what has happened to the new length, what is the new length, and compare it with the old length. Suppose any one of those p lengths you use, then you take the new length and compare it to the old length. So in other words, it is some kind of per unit length, what will be the new length. That's the sort of measure we have. And now this will be different at different points, because when it is not a uniform dilation or uniform stretching or uniform shrinking that we are doing, the elastic material may behave in a non-homogeneous manner. In that case, at different points I will get the different ratios. So how do I sort of measure, keep a track of this? I will look at what is the maximum damage this elasticity can do. So if I can get the maximum of this at each point in that space, then I have some kind of elastic limit that this transformation can reach. And it turns out that is a norm. Okay, and call this norm A, and this is a norm on the space of matrices.
So can you take maximum or need it necessarily be a supreme?
No, you should say supremum, but you can show. Okay, let me put it. Okay. If you are more comfortable with this, I will put least upper bound. Later we will discuss this aspect. Okay. To look at this least upper bound, norm Ax by Axp, and you can do all kinds of things. Why I can take some other length concept here and some other length concept. In general, I could even, I would not look, PQ are always considered for some reason conjugate objects, 1 by P plus 1 by Q equal to 1. So something like, I can choose a P1 measure there and a P2 measure here and look at the change that takes place. That is even different. So in the transform space, I use a different notion of length, and in the original space, I use a different notion of length. So P1 equal to P2, you are choosing the same length. Okay? So that turns out to be so then for this is another new non-linear space. This is not trivial. Previous example I gave was only cheating. I just thought of the matrix as an n squared component vector. So I thought of Cn cross n actually multiplying n and n and make it a Cn squared. And then look at Cn cross n as Cn squared. But now I am not looking at Cn cross n as Cn squared, but I am looking Cn cross n as a transformation of the Cn space and trying to quantify the transformation in some sense. Okay? That is what this norm is. Okay?
So how do we know this is a norm?
It turns out, that's why I said I think. Yeah, I knew. You heard, it's not that difficult. Okay? If you just look at the definitions, is it non-negative? No problem. Constants can be pulled out with absolute value, no problem. The only non-trivial thing is the triangle inequality. That's also not difficult.
Because we have taken maximum here, maximum here.
It's not, that's hand waving proof. Okay. The technical proof will be a little more difficult. But not you have to wave your hand a little more sophisticated.
Sir,
Yes.
why are you taking pth norm of the upper vector and P1?
What I am saying is you have a freedom to do so many things. You could have some concept of length before transforming and some other concept of length after transforming. If you are not comfortable, take the same length. I have no objection. I say that you have a freedom to even generalize this further, taking two different concepts. The reason why I want to do it is, at a later stage, I will look at transformations from one vector space to another vector space. This vector space may have one norm, this vector space may have some other norm. The two vector spaces have no connection with each other except this map. And therefore, when I take the ratio of the transformation, I will have to look at the corresponding norms. The norms in the domain space and the norm in the codomain space. So with that option open, if I have one norm linear space and another norm linear space, let us call it as V1 and the norm here is 1 and the V2, the norm here is 2, and then I have a transformation T. I can take a vector here, look at its image Tx, and then look at this fellow's length. What length I should look at? The length here is the 2 length, divided by the length before the distortion, that length. And then try to take the least upper bound as x varies over V1. I don't know whether the least upper bound exists or not, and when these things make sense, it defines a new norm. So that option I have kept open. Because it turned out these two are the same vector spaces, I could have used the same norm. But even in this, I have the option that I can use different norms, because as vector spaces they may be the same, but in nonlinear spaces they may be different, because the underlying norm may be changed from one vector space. On the same vector space, I can use two different norms. In order to keep that option open, I said you could even take P1 and P2. Is that clear?
So the norm also depends upon the domain X that you are taking, isn't it?
See, it's a non-linear space is a package deal. It is a vector space together with a norm. You specify what vector non-linear space you want to work in. So I specify one non-linear space to work in here, and I take another non-linear space to work in here, and this matrix can be thought of as a transformation from this non-linear space to that non-linear space, and then I have to look at these ratios only, because that phase the only length I want to use is the P1 length. So the options depends on what are the underlying vector spaces, underlying norms in both the domain and the codomain. And that, to make all these things sense, is the whole notion of bounded operators and things like that. Let me give you another example. I don't know why I am doing bounded linear operators. Okay, so this also I could do. I don't know where I ended up with this. A generalization of that. Okay, so I am just generalizing the absolute value, and then how far many things that come out of it. Suppose, okay, I have not yet done continuous functions, etc., etc. Maybe I will hold it and I will do it later. When I do continuous. This only tells that there is a lot of scope for us. So now whatever I could do on the real line with absolute value, therefore give more thought to it, more attention to it, because it is going to have a far-reaching generalization. That's what I want to say. You just don't dismiss it. It is going to immediately take you to far off distance immediately. Okay, if you understood what the absolute value does, right? So therefore, what is our this thing, or the real line with the absolute value? That's the first nonlinear space. General is, next generalization is Cn with the vector space of n component vectors. I could put Rn also, but let us go straight to complex. Then a general vector space with any one of these. You can go now quite far. Okay. That general vector space could be of a very general nature. It could involve vectors which are not vectors of that fixed thought that we have in mind. Okay, the notion of a vector in a more general sense, okay, as an element of a vector space. That's all. Now, so we have modulus are there, correspondingly we have the norm of x and the norm of x. Now which norm you use depends on what vector nonlinear space you are looking at. Then the nonlinear space is a package deal, it tells you what norm you use here. Now, immediately this, we already seen this introduced the notion of distance. We did lot of metric spaces before. What distance that it introduces, if R and S are any two points, any two real numbers, the distance is defined as absolute value of or modulus of R minus S. Now this suggests immediately you do the same thing here also, in the vector spaces also. If you have two vectors x and y, define for x and y in Cn the distance as dxy to be equal to same thing for xy in a vector space in the nonlinear space defines distance as dxy is equal to. Now this satisfies all the requirements. It's non-negative because norm is non-negative. This is, we know properties of distance in the real line. The distance is non-negative because norm is non-negative. The distance is 0 if and only if this is 0. But the norm is, the length is 0 if and only the two vectors are 0. So x is equal to y, x equal to y, then only the distance will be 0. And it is symmetric, dxy equal to dy minus dyx. Because y minus x will pull out a minus 1. But minus 1 will come with a absolute value. When you pull constants out of the norm, they come with absolute value. So it doesn't matter. So all the things are, only thing that is left out is triangle inequality for distance, that follows from the triangle inequality for the norm. So everything is cakewalk here. So the moment you have a norm, automatically you have the notion of a distance, and therefore every non-linear space is automatically a metric space with this metric. So this is called the metric induced by the norm. In all these cases, there is the metric induced by the norm, and Cn also becomes a metric space with this metric. Metric space means the notion of distance is defined. And similarly here, and V becomes the metric. With this distance. Or with this metric. So therefore, the moment you generalize this notion of absolute value to a norm, the norm induces a metric, and the metric immediately brings in all the topological notions, open sets, closed sets, open ball, unit ball, all these dense sets, closed sets, compact sets, all the notions now carried out. So all notions of metric spaces, all these are called the topological notions. Metric space are no other. Okay? In a non-linear space. Now we will do something in the real line and we will immediately see what could be said correspondingly in a non-linear space. Okay. So the first thing in the real line. First of all, we observe 2 or 3 important inequalities, or whatever it is, properties of the absolute value. The first property was already R, absolute value of R plus is less than or equal to absolute value of R plus absolute value of S, that is the triangle inequality. Now, what I am going to write is the following. Suppose R and S belong to R, then I write R as R minus S plus S. This I have seen before, I am going to rewrite it again. So therefore, it says that absolute value of R is equal to the absolute value of R minus S plus S. Now this is of the triangle inequality. The absolute value of A plus B is less than or equal to the absolute value of A plus absolute value of B. So I can write this as, what have I used here? Triangle inequality. And therefore, this says I will take this to this side. So the absolute value of R minus S is less than or equal to absolute value of R minus absolute value of S. Now interchange the role of S and R. What will you get? Absolute value of S minus absolute value of R is less than or equal to absolute value of S minus R. But absolute value of S minus R is the same as absolute value of R minus S. So what it says is, if you look at, if I call it as A and this as B, minus b is also less than this, b minus a is also less than that. A minus b is also less than that, b minus a is less than that. Now there are several options. A can be equal to b. Then obviously it is less than that. A can be greater than b. In that case, what is the absolute value of a minus b? A minus b. But that's also less than or equal. Similarly, if a minus b can be negative, in that case, b minus a is the absolute value, but that is also less than or equal to that. That means whatever a and b are, the absolute value is less than or equal to r minus s. The moral of the story is, if I have a real number, x is less than or equal to k, minus x is less than or equal to k is some positive number, then mod x has to be less than or equal to k. That's all. Okay. So, what we are going to say here therefore is absolute value of this is less than or equal to absolute value of this. This is what I want to. Now this fellow immediately
Would
extends.
that also be considered as some other form of triangular inequality?
This is a consequence of triangle inequality. Okay. This is a consequence of triangle. That's why I said, what is it that I am using? The only thing I need in all these manipulations is the triangle inequality. So instead of this, I take a vector space with a non-linear space. Then do the same thing step by step. For x and y in V, instead of r and s in R, I take x and y in V. X is equal to x minus y plus y. First step. What is the next step? The length of norm of x is equal to norm of x minus y plus y. Triangle inequality. So, this is less than or equal to. Because I have triangle inequality for norms. And that says norm x minus norm y is less than norm of x minus y. That is this step. The next, interchange the role of x and y. Norm y minus norm x less than or equal to norm y minus x. But I can pull out a minus 1 with an absolute value, that is still x minus. Now I am back to the realm of real numbers. Here is a real number x which is less than or equal to the real number k. Here is a real number minus x which is less than or equal to k, and therefore the absolute value of is less than or equal to this. This is what the corresponding result for a non-linear species. The absolute value of the difference in the norms is less than or equal to the norm of the difference. Absolute value of the difference in the norms is less than or equal to the norm of the difference of the two vectors. That's a very simple but very, very useful inequality. Right. The next thing is, one of the first things that we look at in the real numbers is convergence. Okay. So let us look at how do we, this absolute value is the one that gives the distance, and distance is the one that gives us the notion of convergence. Suppose I take a sequence of numbers and x is another real number, then we say xn converges to fx in this space or in this linear space or in the real number system with this modulus sense. If, what happens? If you look at the difference that gets small beyond a certain stage, how do I write it? You give me an error, then I will find a stage which will depend on epsilon. So this is a positive integer such that if we now go and look at beyond that stage, the error will be, if we can do it for every epsilon positive, that is a corresponding stage beyond which the error between xn and x can be controlled within epsilon. However small epsilon is, you give me the epsilon, I will tell you where you should go and look, how far in the sequence, which of our then goes. This is what is the notion of convergence is. Now there is no problem, this entire thing can be copied because the only thing that is needed here is the absolute value. So suppose I have a non-linear space, then I take vector, I will now look at vector sequence in the superscript for some reason, okay, you will see why. I will take a sequence of vectors in this space and another vector in that space. We say, let's copy what should be done. Xn converges to x in this space, because this entire definition depends on the norm. The moment you change the norm, the estimates will be different. So it is completely dependent on the norm that you are using. In this space, if for every epsilon, see nothing, I can simply copy, there is a positive integer n epsilon such that n greater than or equal to n epsilon implies this is the place where the norm takes over, norm of xn minus x. So immediately we have the notion of convergence in a nonlinear space. Here the distance between the two of them must be small. The distance is dictated by the absolute value. There the distance is dictated by the norm, that's all. So the moment you change the norm, the distance concept also changes, therefore the error concept also changes. So something may converge in one norm but not converge in another norm. There are 2 or 3 simple things about convergent sequences. See, normally you must do real line completely and then come to the general things, but here people are in a hurry. Okay, they are already using LP spaces, L2 spaces, L2 feedback, stability and all kinds of things. So they are in a great hurry from move to here to there. So keeping them in mind, I am trying to see how quickly you can see, at least see that this is only generalization of this. Right. Some of the important things about convergence. So let us say, suppose xn converges to x in R. What does that mean? Xn's are real numbers, x is a real number, and xn converges to x with that definition. The difference can be made as small as you please beyond a certain stage, and that's it. Now there are some very simple consequences of this. Some simple consequences which we will be repeatedly using when we do convergence analysis. The first simple consequence is, now I am given this, xn converges to x. So all this definition holds. The first consequence is, the absolute value of xn converges to absolute value of x. Why does it happen?
Triangular is correct.
Let us call this as your essentially it's not just triangular inequality, just a little one step more. Okay. Call absolute xn as am, absolute x as a, and we want to show that an converges to a. If an converges to a, we want to show that, we want to show this. An minus a we must be able to make small. That's all it essentially says. So we want to estimate an minus a. What is an minus a? Now we showed that this is less than or equal to, but because xn converges to x, this can be made small, and therefore this can also be made small. And hence, but I'll just write that by convergence of xn to x, we get the result. It's essentially writing down the remaining steps. If I can control this fellow to small, and this fellow is all, it has to stay to his left, he also has to be small, and they are all on the other side, 0 is blocking them. Now, exactly the same inequality is available in the norm thing, and therefore we can say analogous result is if xn, so property 1, if xn converges to x in, then the first property is that the norm xn will converge to, okay, which is what would be said that the norm is a continuous function. As limit n tending to infinity of norm xn is the same as norm x. You can push the limit inside. Okay. What this says is limit n tending to infinity norm xn is equal to norm limit n tending to xn. This limit, the norm is a continuous process. It can be, the limits can be pushed inside. That's the first important property. The second,
There is superscript as a,
pardon me,
where you initially started with superscript.
Notation.
which one?
You started with
Second line.
Second line, sir.
You said
Sequence of vectors.
Sequence.
X superscript.
Oh, you want, yeah, that's right. Put all superscripts. The reason is, if I want to take vectors, I have to put the component number also. I want to put the component index at the lower whenever I want to put n component vectors, etc. Each vector will have n components, and I want to write it as a subscript. So the vector, the sequence index will be superscript and this thing. So here also I must have superscripts. Now this is superscript. Okay, that's right. Good. The second property is the following, important property again. Again, I am assuming xn converges to x. Xn must be a bounded space. What does that mean? That is, there exists m, a positive real number, such that mod xn is less than or equal to m for all. Every convergent sequence is bounded. What this says is every convergent sequence must be bounded. But if you recall, let's see how we'll prove this. Let's take x is here, right? This xn converges to x. That means beyond a certain stage, all these fellows start crowding around x. Now I ask them all to crowd around x, say within a unit distance, right? Then what happens? All the xn's for n greater than or equal to some n1 will lie here. Right? So at least you can say one thing. What? Beyond a certain stage, you see that they are all bounded. There is something to the right of which they cannot go. It's just pictorial. You should write technical proof. So therefore, if I have all, from here on, they are all bounded. They are all controlled. Okay, all these fellows in modulus will be less than or equal to some k for j greater than or equal to n1. This k you can get in terms of x. I will not go into any details. But intuitively it's clear now what's happening there. But I claim that all this, for all of them there is one bound. I have found beyond a certain stage is one bound. But bounding is no problem when you have only finite number of them. Now we look at these fellows. Look at this absolute value, this absolute value, this absolute value. There may be somebody who got negative marks also. But ignore the negative sign and take the positive sign and look at the marks only. And take the maximum of these fellows. That makes sense. Call this as n. There are only finite number of them. So we can talk about the maximum. Now, all these fellows have absolute value less than or equal to k. All these fellows have absolute value less than or equal to L. So if we take M to be the maximum of k and L, all these fellows are less than or equal to M. All these fellows are also less than or equal to M. Therefore everybody is less than or equal to M. So that's the very. So what they do is divide and conquer. There is an infinite number of fellows. You divide them into two groups. One group which takes all the infinite fellows beyond a certain state and conquer them. And you conquer them because of convergence. And the other fellows, the head, it's finite, they can always be conquered. Okay, so therefore you divide them and conquer. Yeah. The questions? No, the same
What
thing.
is it? X1 is infinity.
Huh?
I mean, one of them is infinity.
See, I know all of them come and fall in this trap.
So on this side,
They are all real numbers. How can they be infinite? All of them are real numbers. There are finite number of real numbers. So there should be a maximum for the absolute value. Okay. Those x1, x2, x1, 1 are some real number. They cannot be infinite. Finite number of real numbers. Infinity is not a real number. Okay. Is a real number really a number? That's metaphysics. That is meta-mathematics. It is only in your mind. What is 1? I don't know what is 2, what is 3. It's only in my mind. Only when I see a concrete realize it's same problem. What is God? We could not explain. So we start talking about different forms of God. I don't know what is 1, but I can talk about one dog, one animal, one pencil, one chalk. Then I understand. But what is 1? I don't know what it is. What is 5? I don't know. But 5 trees, 5 chocolates, I can understand. So that 5 is the abstract concept. I am trying to concretely realize it by some form. Okay. So these are all avatars of the same God 5. Then eventually you have to get away with some philosophy. Okay. Philosophy is the best way to confuse people and get away with it. Okay. So now, analogously, the second property here is the same story. Exactly same story repeats, only at this stage you have to copy that exactly. Where was that? Xn must be bounded. What does that mean? Xn must be bounded. That is, there exists a positive real number m such that, now what? The norm of Xn is less than 1. Okay. The third important property of convergent sequence is that every convergent sequence is a Cauchy sequence. This also we had seen. So I will just write that. Third property is that, let me just explain what it means. Suppose now it's convergent, there is x, then beyond a certain stage, all the fellows will come and fall here. And that, for example, I take this as epsilon by 2 and this as epsilon. So all of them can be trapped in any interval around x. Whatever the error is, I can trap all the fellows beyond a certain stage. If all the fellows were beyond certain stage, take, so say n greater than or equal to 10, for all k greater than or equal to n, xk comes and falls here in this interval. Then take two fellows n and m greater than or equal to n. Xn will also fall here, xm will also fall here. The worst case is one fellow is here, one fellow is there. And therefore the maximum distance can be epsilon. So therefore that also can be controlled. So that's what is meant by Cauchy sequence. So we say that xn must be a Cauchy sequence. That is, for every epsilon positive, there exists a positive integer n epsilon such that beyond that stage, any two fellows will be listed. And same argument works here, namely xn. Should I write again the superscript here? Xn must be that is for every epsilon. You know there is a positive integer n epsilon such that n plus n epsilon implies okay. Now, the interesting thing is, in the real line, whenever a sequence is convergent to x, it is also a Cauchy sequence, and conversely, whenever it is a Cauchy sequence, there must be an x to which it converges. That is the completeness of the real number. But this is not guaranteed in an abstract non-linear space. If it is not guaranteed, put it as a hypothesis. If that is also satisfied, we call it a complete non-linear space, or in a very fancy way, Banach space. Banach was the one who introduced this idea. He was very clever. He knew that someday he is going to be very important, and he called it B space. He knew that eventually B will become Banach space. He called it B space. Stefan Banach was an outstanding Polish mathematician, I guess. So therefore, and now let me write here, in the real life, so that is this is 1, okay, this is 2 in every Cauchy sequence in a general nonlinear space. The general nonlinear space, a Cauchy B dot, a Cauchy sequence need not converge. If the nonlinear space is such that every Cauchy sequence converges, then is called a Banach space. Or a complete non-linear space. I remember this, well, I think I should conclude here, but there is a famous joke now that I think is quite a few years now past. You can keep it for yourself, don't spread it. Just like this B space, several years ago, one of our, this way is not mention his name. A very good theoretical, I mean, fairly well-known active theoretical physicist, called a matrix as L matrix. His wife's name was Lalita. So he thought eventually it would be called Lalita matrix, but it stayed as L matrix forever. Unfortunately, nobody knew his wife's name was Lalita, except some few friends. So sometimes it's successful. If you want to play it safe, call it by your full name straight away. Okay, so now I would like to proceed with this convergence. I'll proceed with that convergence ideas and simultaneously look at the notions in the non-linear space. So already we see one difficulty that may arise. This completeness may arise, whether a non-linear space is complete or not. Now the simplest examples that we started off with are Cn and any one of these norms. Okay, that is always complete. Whatever this P norm you choose on the n-dimensional complex space, it is always complete. Is a Banach space for every P. But I look at an LP equal to infinity also. And even more, whatever norm we introduce on a finite dimensional space, all the topologies are equivalent, and therefore it will always be a Banach space. Cn, we know so many. We also introduce now other norms, namely through a matrix. So that maybe somebody else will come up with some other way of introducing a concept of length. So there will be several concepts of length. But as long as those three axioms are satisfied, greater than or equal to 0 if and only f(x) equal to 0, a norm of alpha x is mod alpha times norm x, triangle inequality, then Cn is a Banach space for any norm. Okay. Not only that, even more. That is, if Xn converges to X in Cn for any norm, then Xn will converge to X in any other norm. That is, if you have convergence in one length concept, you will have convergence in all length concept, and the same limit you will get. You will not get different lengths. This is because doing finite dimensional thing is doing n-dimensional thing is doing one dimension n times. All of them boil down to convergence component wise. And so whatever convergence notion with whatever norm you bring, each one of them will imply convergence to component wise, and conversely if you have component wise convergence, you will always have convergence in any other form. So basically this is what people say a finite dimensional fiasco. So therefore doing finite dimensional thing, convergence thing is essentially doing n dimensional thing is doing one dimension n times. This is doing n dimensional thing. Essentially it boils down to that. So I will indicate that next time, and this is immediately true in any finite dimensional nonlinear space. That is, you take a finite dimensional space, put any norm on it, and then if you have one convergence in one norm, you have convergence in all norms. All norms are in a sense equivalent in that sense. The topology that is generated is equivalent. Okay? All these topologies are equal. If something is an open set in one, something the other. Therefore, if its convergence in one is also convergent. The limit is this, the limit is this. Okay, that is, and therefore, sometimes when somebody says I am working in a 1000-dimensional space, it doesn't make sense to me. Whether you are working in a 1000-dimensional space or a 1,000,000-dimensional space is the same for me. You are doing one-dimensional space 1000 times. Only thing is you are doing some computational efficiency, trying to do it better, etc. But topologically, etc., convergent aspects and all, nothing great. So the one major step we will have to take. After all this, we realize, well, nothing great I have achieved in doing in finite dimensional space. I did lot of things, but basic concept-wise, I haven't gone any further than doing one-dimensional thing. So the real leap comes when you move to infinite dimensional spaces, okay? And that is real analysis. I mean, not real analysis, it's real analysis. I think I'll stop here. Incidentally, I will not take the class on Monday, I will be out of town. So next class will be on next Friday.
So, could you make it on Wednesday?
I think this was this